Hi guys, welcome to my video demo of a sketch of the vertical takeoff landing vehicle from the recent film Oblivion. This is a blue line sketch study that I'm doing for my students at Cal State Long Beach, and just kind of fleshing out the basic forms. It's a really great form study object to work off of, just because it's really kind of sphere logic, and then this central pod or core element where the main thrusters and things like that, all the power and engine and all that kind of stuff is centered around, is basically kind of an inverted pyramid of sorts, which mirrors and reflects the kind of mothership that's off the just off Earth's orbit. So there's some nice geometric symmetry in the film in that regard. Here I'm just kind of fleshing out my forms, sketching through the center lines and setting up where the different elements are, the different main elements of the ship are in space, establishing my fundamentals, basic perspective, where that thing exists in that perspective field, where my horizon line is a reference point, and slowly articulating it a little bit stronger. I'm just using a standard mechanical pencil with a blue lead in it. I believe this is a 0.7 millimeter or 0.9 millimeter pencil. I don't recall. I think it's a 0.9 millimeter technical pencil with a blue lead. I definitely recommend you don't use something thinner than a 0.7 when it comes to these colored leads and these technical pencils. They just simply break far too easy. You can't really work in the deep values, and they're more frustrating than anything. Here I'm sketching in a little bit of reflections and shadow character on that base plane, just kind of setting up the drawing, keep working around. I like to bounce around a bit in my sketch or in my drawing. I like to explore different areas, make sure I don't get too focused on one part of the drawing too much. It's easy to get lost in one little area, and next thing you know, you zoom out and you realize you've kind of blown the geometry for the whole form and where it belongs in space and so forth. So when I start feeling a little bit more like I've got the geometry where I want it, or I feel like I've nailed the form and the shape or the position, I'll just start to come in and flush it out, create a little bit more strength, dig a little deeper on the pencil, allow some of those values to really sink in, adding some core shade logic. You'll notice this is a lot of spheres and ellipses in a lot of ways, and normally I would spin the paper around to work with the natural direction that my hand wants to make those arcs and those ellipses, to control it a little bit better. But in this video demo, I'm really trying to keep the paper still for the viewer so that you're not getting disoriented by it spinning around too much. Later on in the video, I do wind up, for detailing, finer edges and really kind of burning in some parting seams and separations between the glass and the frames and things like that. I'll spin the paper around a little bit, but early on here I try to keep it pretty stable. The tail, the sketch got away from me. I think I made a little mistake early on in the layout, and realized that I kind of built the tail rudder element there a little bit wrong. So I started working on it and making it into something of my own. And anywhere, I'm a big believer that anywhere, even when you're doing a sketch of somebody else's design element, you're more than welcome to, it's your sketch, and in the end it's all about you making that sketch work. So feel free to be creative, modify parts, modify elements. As long as it fits into the perspective logic, it'll always read like a solid drawing for somebody, and it's a good learning tool for yourself at any cost. So here I'm laying in some of the landscape or the distant horizon and the depth of the photo or the image, and really this platform that this VTOL is sitting on is up in the clouds. So this background that I'm laying down, that could be a canopy of a forest, but in this case it's a canopy of clouds, the tops of clouds in the distance. So I'm just sketching in a I was just sketching in a simple diagonal crosshatch across that plane and mixing up where I lay in a little bit stronger values. I'll come back and work on that sky a little bit more again. Each time you make a pass on your drawing or your rendering and you start to lay in a little bit stronger value, it'll modify your eye. It'll modify what you see and how you see it. And so I tend to err on the side of caution and work into my drawings and renderings slowly. Let my eye sink into it, let my mind sink into it, let my hand and my arm sink into it. And just slowly keep developing and pushing the story, developing details, tightening up geometry wherever you can, wherever you need it. And as you start to see the geometry really coming together, you can start to burn in stronger shadow values, and the lighting and the shading and all that sort of thing. The key is to keep focused on where your light source is in the scene, what elements are transparent or glass, what's maybe a polished surface, what's the material made of, how is that thing made. The more you know about how things are made or fabricated and assembled, the more you can articulate what that might possibly be in the drawing in the sketch. Here you can see I'm working in the sky a little bit stronger, working on the clouds, the density of the clouds. Maybe some of those clouds have a little bit more grayish value to them. So even though I'm working in a blue palette, it's just a monochromatic drawing. So it's all about values, understanding rendering values and how to articulate and develop a story of an object or a form or a drawing through those values and through your form logic and your perspective logic. So the more you have those fundamentals, the more you can improvise, and the more your improvisations still make sense within the whole narrative and the logic of the drawing itself. The cutouts, what's an undercut, where there's shadow values, where there's reflections possibly on that surface, what's a hole and a perforation and a cutout and a notch. These are the little vent intakes for these jet engines. Very nice little star kind of pattern on the front of the spheres. Really creative design here, actually. Very novel, really unique aircraft. So it was really fun to draw this, actually. And I highly recommend, especially to beginning designers or anyone new to rendering, work off of photographs of familiar forms or things that inspire you. The more you do that and practice your fundamentals, the more that can come back and inform your own original work too, because it helps you build up your library of data in your head that you can reference. There I'm showing you which pencils I'm going to use, which is I'm going to start to come in. There's a photo of the magazine and the original photograph. I changed my perspective in my sketch of the aircraft, so we're lower down a little bit than the way the photo is taken. We're just a little bit below the jet engine rather than straight aligning the two spheres. I just thought it would make a slightly more dynamic sketch, so I took a little liberty with the eye level that we're at, or our horizon line. And again, now I'm working in using indigo Prismacolor pencils, and I'm just showing you that I like to kind of set up a few that are already pre-sharpened, and it makes my time a little bit faster. I can just kind of move around, switch to another pencil when one gets a little dull, and flush out these details and these edges. You'll notice I don't have really anything that would constitute, say, a fat, heavy, or thick profile line. It's a different kind of illustrative style. It's a really beautiful style to draw that way. I tend to draw where I try to burn in values through the shading and the shadows and the backgrounds and the contrast, and really more of like a painterly style, maybe, if you want to call it that. And use your depth to really create the contrast that you need to articulate the edges and the forms. I suppose one could come back in and still put a stronger profile line around different parts if they really wanted to, or if they want to push that style. So here I picked up my my blue line sketch pencil, and I'm just starting to kind of flesh in some other forms, shape up some things. Anytime I'm not quite sure where I'm going with it, I might pick up that pencil and work in a little bit of sketching, because it's very forgiving. It'll meld into the rest of the work very easily, and gives me a neutral or medium value for the shading values. A little bit more indigo pencil work in there. I think right here I'm taking a little moment, maybe studying the photograph, sitting back, looking where I need to develop the volumetrics a little bit more, the tonal value, and maybe sharpening up those pencils or something like that, the indigo pencils. Sketching in some details on that ground plane, and even shading in a little bit of a value across that plane. So the plane's not just simply flat white like the paper. It's some of the details that I'm laying in are hard to read in a video. They certainly make a difference in the actual drawing rendering, and I think some of that comes through in the video still, even though you wouldn't be able to point to it and say, oh, he put a little bit of value there across that ground plane. So now I'm just starting to work in, again, deeper values as I start to understand where I'm at in the drawing and what's missing. Start to flesh out the foot pedals for the pilot in there. I later discovered that the cockpit is actually a two-seater cockpit when I looked at the photo a little closer, and I had sketched it as a one-seater cockpit. So you know, again, a bit of you know, aesthetic or creative, just winging it and making some judgment calls about what I think it could be or whatever, and just living with it and making it work, making the drawing work. At the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that you know, nobody's going to be comparing your drawing or rendering side by side to some other thing, and what you have to do is develop the arsenal of skills or tools that you can draw from at any given time to just simply make your drawing really pop and work. And then it gives people your design, maybe your design director. You can see I'm fleshing out my pilot a little bit stronger, getting his shoulder proportions, his leg proportions, figuring out where his hand position is on the throttle controller. Maybe working a little bit of white highlight pencil here and there. Here I'm dusting with some pastel, and I cut some blue pastel with a little bit of black, and I think I cut a little bit too much black in it because it really came out a bit dirtier than I was looking for. So I'm coming back now with a kneaded eraser and just backing off, cleaning up at the edges first, cleaning up the edges where the pastels run over. In this rendering, I just wanted to clean it up a bit. Coming back with a hard eraser and cleaning that up, putting in some highlights again, back on the forms, burning in highlights, even highlights on the glass and on the chrome or polished forms. And back with the kneaded eraser, which is a little bit softer on the transitions. A hard eraser will let me burn in. In the end, I wound up fading off that propeller blade in the back, the rear rudder and blade, just letting that really kind of drift out of our focus, so I can center our focus in the foreground on the cockpit and on the center body and on the thruster in front of us. So coming back and putting in some details now with the pencils that maybe got washed out and flattened and muted down with the pastels, and now just kind of fleshing out and re-articulating those seams and the edges and parting lines. And again, now working with the indigo pencil, and you know, kind of back and forth. I'm always holding my pencils in my hand, a different set of pencils sometimes, so I can pull from them at any given time and just keep working quickly. This whole rendering took me about 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes or so total time. And so obviously this is sped up considerably to get it into about 24-25 minutes of video time. But I think you get the idea of how I'm moving my hand and where I'm kind of bouncing around, fleshing out the story, working evenly sort of across the whole scene, even with the tail rudder in the faded distance or less articulated. Same thing with the rear leg of the vehicle, letting that fade off into the distance, but giving us more and more depth and intention in the foreground and on the pieces that matter in the foreground. I think I'm using a number 4, I believe this is a number 4 cool gray marker. I like to use Copics. Personally, I like the way they move. I like the values, and I'm quite comfortable with them. But if you prefer Prismacolors or some other brand, Touches or some other brand, that's fine. It's all a matter of learning how your tools work. I think this is a number 7 cool gray. So starting to really develop some of that reflectivity and polish and deeper shade and shadow contrast and core shade logic on that half sphere kind of element coming out of the body. And yeah, just keep developing it, keep pushing the depth. One of the hardest things I think for beginning drawing students is developing your depth, really giving your drawings a value range. And you have to think about values, not colors. Here I'm just laying in the shadow or the clouds a little bit stronger again. So you can see I've made, this is now the 3rd pass on the clouds. It's not like a one-shot, and you're there kind of approach. You just kind of see different opportunities. Every time you move through your drawing and your rendering, you see new opportunities arise. My stroke on those clouds is always in this slightly diagonal stroke. So something like a 60-degree angle perhaps, but relatively consistent across that fields, because I want that to really recede to the background of the scene. And starting to articulate the vertical plane of that platform that it's sitting on, giving that a little bit of a value, not too much, but a little bit. Build up a little contrast there at the corner. The right plane is away from the light source, so it's going to read a little bit darker than the left plane most likely, unless there's some sort of reflection on it or something else going on, which happens sometimes with bounce light or secondary light sources or reflections off of other buildings or other elements in the scene. Sometimes you don't know what those elements are, so you can fake it, but when you don't know, just stick with the fundamentals. Here I'm adding in some shadows, extra reflections, a little bit of extra volumetrics. Again, now back to the deeper. You can see I've got 3 or 4 markers in my hand, so I can switch values at any given moment. I can bounce from the jet engine, from the interior where the cockpit instrument panel is above his head, to this panel that's it's got some sort of valves and hoses and maybe some controllers in there of some sort. Showing you I'm using a dual tip Sharpie. In this rendering I don't use the fat end. I just don't find there's any reason to put a big fat profile line around the object. So I use the thin tip of the Sharpie. Maybe sharpening or looking for the right, here I'm looking for the right yellow I think I want to use. And I'm looking for a sort of a dirty yellow value. And I want to add like a bit of a warm light into the scene. So even though it's a blue line sketch and a relatively cool drawing overall, I'm adding just a little bit of hints of warm light from the light source. Maybe the sun is setting, or it's a light cast from the main house or something like that. Maybe some incandescent lighting kind of thing from the main house. Even though I think actually that house was a very modernist house, probably all very cool lighting and things like that, but adds a little bit of warmth to the rendering nonetheless. A white Prismacolor pencil. This is a whiteout pen, and that's some Dr. Martin's pH gouache, I believe it is, that other canister that I showed you. So I start out with this paint pen. Paint pens are quick and dirty. They're not very precise. Don't expect them to be pretty precise. You have to really be careful with it. These are tough because you have to kind of squeeze it to get the ink to come out, and you'll see there's some slightly heavy marks there on the jet engine and some other places. I later on come back with the paintbrush and the pH Martins to just do a little bit cleaner edging work on the highlight values and things like that. So now I'm starting to articulate some of that engine material or whatever is happening inside there, inside that panel. And this is, again, the thin tip of the Sharpie in this case. And in this drawing, this is really my fattest or deepest blacks, is the thin tip of the Sharpie, rather than the thick tip. Try to stick with a certain kind of subtlety on this rendering rather than a maybe bolder graphic style. So now I'm working with a very, very fine micron pen, sorry, Copic pen. It's just a technical pen with a 0.05 nib on it. So it's an ultra fine. I'm just coming in, working in some deeper blacks and articulations on some little separation panels and things like that. Just keep flushing out the deep values and articulating little shapes and parting lines and separations, adding details, little things for your eye to keep moving around and wondering what that thing might be. And even I don't have any idea what those things really are. I'm just kind of faking it and thinking like, oh, this could be like some sort of pivot point, maybe a rotation, maybe there's like some sort of gearing system inside there. Maybe there's some, you know, again, wiring, hoses, some sort of exposed systems, you name it. This is a black Prismacolor pencil, I believe, or else the indigo again. I believe it's the black. And that's allowing me to fade off and soften some of the ink line work, some of the black ink, and give it that black point depth and value. And just kind of sitting back, taking a look at it, getting an idea of maybe where I could add a little bit more. And starting to bring it to a close, to an end. Here I'm sketching through the window, through the glass, and adding the values of the other jet engine on the other side. And, you know, again, when you're first starting out, a lot of times students have a tendency to forget about glass and what is happening and what the life is on the other side of the glass window. So it's really important to think about where there's holes in the legs, for example. I have to render through those little holes, those little strut arms, or just like the glass and the frame and the structure on the glass. Kind of flush out the story, really kind of move it. And just coming in, again with the ultra fine line pen. And, you know, if you had an ellipse guide around, you could certainly use ellipses to control some of these, some of the ellipses and even the sphere forms to create a really perfect circle or a perfect ellipse on the edges. But you know, again, I kind of, I'm a firm believer in learning how to control those shapes anyway. So here I'm just kind of sketching out my presentation a little bit. It's not going to be really presented, but I want to give credit to what the thing is and who the designer was. This is called a bubble ship. I think the designer was David Simon. And again, the movie was from Oblivion. Always conscious, I laid out with my lettering, lay out some light guidelines, very, very thin light guidelines to control your letter heights, control your position on the page, control the thickness of your letter strokes that you're going to flesh out, starting to articulate maybe some design choices about how the letter forms maybe intersect, a little bit of graphic design. Here I'm using an orange that's a little complementary color value. That's on the wing tips or on the rocket engine, those little radio antennas or lightning rods that are sticking off of the jet engines have also little beacon lights that are in yellow and or that little off yellow. And so I like to use a sort of a subtle color that's in my drawing or rendering and use that as an accent for the presentation. There you have it, giving credit to the designer in the film. Give it a signature, and